I remember the cold, not the kind from the air conditioning, nor the one from sterilized sheets. It was a cold that came from within, a shiver that started in my stomach and spread to my bones when I realized the gurney was moving and that I was alone. Alone. The hospital hallways seemed to echo more than usual that morning. Each little wheel on the gurney scraped the floor as if to remind me, "You're going," and no one came. While the nurses whispered instructions to each other, I searched with my eyes, with my heart, with hope for a familiar face, a whisper of affection, a touch of a hand, a look that would say, "It's going to be okay, Olivia. I'm here." But there was no one, not my husband, not my children, not my sister, with whom I had shared pillows and secrets for so many years. At the moment when the body cries out for help, I realized the heart suffered from another kind of absence. The kind that isn't, it's abandonment. I was taken to the operating room like someone crossing into the unknown, with no compass or sail, and even with all the monitors, scalpels, and medical protocols, I felt that the deepest wound wasn't in my body. It was in the certainty that I didn't mean enough for anyone to leave home that morning and come with me. Have you ever wondered who would really be by your side if life pushed you to the edge? I thought I knew the answer. I really did. After all, I built a family, got married, did everything they said was right. I showed up at birthdays, hospital stays, graduations, promotions, and losses. I was the woman who carried bags, purses, guilt, and promises, the one who organized the house, the schedules, and the ES. And still, in that cold hallway, there was no one. Maybe they're running late, I tried to think. Maybe they're on their way. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't the first time I needed them and they didn't come. The difference is that before, I used to hide it, pretend it didn't hurt that much, believe the excuses. I believed that love was just like that. Imperfect, busy, sometimes distracted. Not this time. This time, the vibe screamed. It screamed so loud it drowned out the sound of the heart monitor, the anesthetist's whisper, even the trembling of my own breath. In that white room, as a mask approached my face, the only thing I could think was, my God, did I build all of this alone? This marriage, this family, was it just me the whole time? It was there, with oxygen entering and consciousness slipping away, that something inside me also went quiet. The illusion that I was loved, the way I believed I deserved to be. I blacked out before I could finish the thought, and maybe that was for the best. Because sometimes, the deepest pain is realizing while still awake that the love you so carefully built was just a facade. And when everything collapses, the walls don't hold. Only the echo remains, and the echo never lies. When I woke up from the anesthesia, everything looked blurry: the ceiling, the lights, the memories, but the absence, that was crystal clear. No message, no familiar voice, no hug. And even though my body was still groggy, my mind awakened to a pain no sedative could numb, the broken promise. They say at the altar we vow to love in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow. But no one talks about the E. No one vows to be there when all the other person needs is simply not to be alone. My husband didn't show up. 30 years of marriage, 30 Christmases, 30 birthdays, 3 children, 3 decades of shared meals, combined bills, and shared bed sheets. And still, he didn't come. I spent my youth believing that marriage was an anchor, that wedding rings protected against the storm, that building a life together was like building a home where, even on the worst days, there would be shelter. But no one told me that some homes are built on quicksand, and sometimes the fall only happens when pain knocks at the door. Lying in that hospital bed, alone, I revisited that spring afternoon when we said, I do. The dress wasn't new, but I felt beautiful. My eyes sparkled like they knew life would be safe from then on. Safe, what a misleading word. For years, I mistook stability for love. I thought physical presence meant emotional presence. I ignored the long S, the dry words, the automatic gestures. I thought it was normal. I thought time just wore things down, that it was like that for everyone. But it wasn't. It was absence disguised as routine, distance dressed up as commitment. Many marriages are like glass chairs. They look solid, but they shatter under the first real weight. And the weight came. It came in the form of an illness that took me to the operating table, and at the same time, took the blindfold off my eyes. He didn't come. Not even a phone call. Not even a note. Nothing. And still, something inside me tried to justify it. Maybe he's busy. Maybe he doesn't know how to handle it. Maybe he's scared. Love, when it wants to survive, makes up excuses. And mine had been in a coma for years. The room grew dark with the fall of night, but my mind wouldn't rest. Every word spoken at the altar now seemed to mock me. In joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health. How many of those promises were truly made, and how many were just part of the script? The truth is, I believed. I believed like a child believes in fairy tales, like someone who has never tasted loneliness believes that love is enough. But love, when it's not nurtured, dies of thirst. And ours had dried up long ago. Only now did I realize that the small daily absences, the gaze that no longer met mine, the touch that became routine, the laughter that faded were symptoms of a much deeper absence. An absence that hadn't started in that surgery, it had just become undeniable. Lying there, alone, I understood. The mistake wasn't that he didn't come. The mistake was that I thought he would. The night after the surgery, I woke up with a dry throat and heavy eyes. The IV still dripped beside the bed, and the monitor made that monotonous sound, as if to remind me that yes, I was still alive, but not whole. The nurse came in, gently adjusted my pillows, and murmured something that, at the time, I didn't think much of. Your companion just left. He was here all night. My heart jumped, not with joy, but confusion. Companion? She noticed the lost look on my face and smiled kindly. He comes every day, quiet. He sits right there, in that chair. Sometimes he reads. Sometimes he just watches you sleep. He doesn't bother anyone. I shook my head, trying to make sense of it. My husband never came. My kids didn't even send a message. My sister said she was taking care of some things. Who then would be there for me? I spent the day trying to piece it together, but still groggy from the meds. I couldn't think straight. That night, I pretended to sleep. The room was quiet, lit only by the faint light from the hallway. And that's when I heard soft footsteps, a gentle creak as the chair was pulled out. My breathing slowed. I caught a scent, something familiar. It wasn't cologne, it was memory. An old scent, tucked away in the corners of time. I opened my eyes slowly, not wanting to startle him. And there he was, Marcus, sitting, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together, like someone praying or waiting for something they know may never come. He hadn't noticed I was watching. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen Marcus in years, since that last cold conversation, full of unsaid goodbyes, when I chose to go another way, with another man. He looked older, of course. The wrinkles around his eyes gave away the time, but something about him hadn't changed. The way he looked at things, like he always saw more than I said, like he could see right through me. He stayed there for nearly an hour, then stood up, gently pulled the blanket over my feet, something not even my husband had ever done, and left without saying a word. I couldn't hold back the tears, not because of the gesture itself, but because he, of all people, the one I hurt without thinking, was the one who showed up. Abandonment has many faces. Some scream. Others just go quiet. But the cruelest is the invisible kind, the one that happens while they say they love you. And that night, I faced a truth that split me open. Sometimes the one we hurt the most is the one who stays when everyone else disappears. Marcus owed me nothing. We were nothing anymore. But he showed up. No flowers, no questions, no resentment. He brought, and for the first time in a long time, it was a psyche that embraced me, not one that crushed me. The next night he came back. This time, I didn't pretend to be asleep. Marcus entered slowly, as if asking permission with nothing but his movement. He sat in the same chair and stayed silent for a few minutes, his eyes fixed on the wall. Only then did he look at me and smile, a shy, somewhat sad smile, like someone who knows they no longer have a place, but chose to stay nearby anyway. "You're awake," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "I thought you wouldn't even notice me. I thought I was dreaming," I replied. He chuckled, but his eyes welled up. Mine did too. "I didn't know if it was right to come," he continued. "But when I heard about the surgery, I just couldn't not come. I didn't know what to say, because the last time I saw Marcus, I had left him standing outside my door, heart in hand, with no explanation that could fix what I broke. I thought you hated me." He shook his head slowly. "I did, for a while. But then I understood. You were trying to do the right thing, choosing what seemed right. And sometimes, what feels right can lie to us." I went quiet. The right thing I had chosen was my husband, the life that promised stability, respect, safety. But the safety I found was made of cold stone. No shelter, no warmth. "Why did you come?" I asked, trying to hold back the emotion. "After everything," he hesitated, took a deep breath before answering. "Because despite everything, I still care." Those words didn't come heavy. They didn't accuse. They didn't expect. They simply existed. And they hurt. They hurt because they came from someone I had wounded, and because they revealed a truth I had avoided for so long. Sometimes the one we choose doesn't take care of us, and the one who would have we left behind. While the world turned its back on me, Marcus, the man I betrayed emotionally with empty promises, was laying down invisible flowers beside my pain. He didn't bring gifts or requests to come back. He brought presence, and there was healing in that. He didn't say much that night. Told me about a new coffee shop that opened near the old square, how the city felt smaller now, how the years had passed too fast. I listened with a lump in my throat, not out of longing but from the awareness of what I had lost. He stood to leave, and before walking out, left an envelope on the table beside my bed. It wasn't a letter. It was an old photo, the two of us, young, sitting on the grass, laughing at something silly. Me, barefoot. Him, eyes glowing. On the back, In his crooked handwriting, he had written, "Remember who you were, Olivia. She's still in there." When he left, his presence felt heavier than the absence of all the others. There is no greater pain than realizing you chose wrong, but maybe there's some salvation in recognizing who, even hurt, never stopped caring. After Marcus left that night, the Yal was no longer the same. It didn't hurt the way it used to. Now, it carried memories, questions, and above all, truths I had spent years avoiding. I kept staring at the photo he left behind. In that image was a version of me I barely recognized. Free, messy, haired, laughing without restraint, and eyes full of future. Next to me, Marcus, with the same calm in his gaze he still carries today, like someone who always knew that life is made of waiting, not rushing. I asked myself, at what moment did I lose the woman in that photo? It was gradual, a silent agreement here, a disguised sacrifice there, a swallowed never mind in the name of peace. A glance deliberately turned away, so I wouldn't have to see what was screaming right in front of me. And it was through that slow, almost invisible process that I ended up choosing my husband, not with my heart, but with my eyes. He was stable, successful, had plans, projections. He spoke of the future like someone who had already bought it in monthly installments. He offered me a life with fewer risks, fewer uncertainties. And at the time, I mistook that for love. How many times do we call something security when it's really just the absence of risk and also the absence of love? My marriage wasn't a shelter, it was a contract. An unspoken agreement of cohabitation, held together by duties and responsibilities, but it lacked life, it lacked laughter, it lacked soul. I fell in love with the idea of a stable home, and ended up living in a frozen fortress, where even the warmth of skin became routine. I chose with my eyes, with logic, with the need to make it work, and I ignored what my body was screaming between the lines. That true love doesn't settle you, it awakens you. Marcus had nothing to offer that guaranteed stability. He was impulsive, a dreamer, a little lost, but he listened to me, he saw me, and above all, he felt me. At the time I thought that wasn't enough, that I needed more. Today, I realize what I left behind was exactly what I've missed the most. In life, sometimes we choose walls thinking they'll protect us, but when we finally open our eyes, we see we've built our own prison. It wasn't a mistake to marry who I married. The mistake was ignoring the signs, the coldness in the gestures, the emptiness in the hugs, the absence in the moments I most needed to be seen. And the cruelest part is realizing all of this now sick, fragile, facing the very real possibility of not going home. Maybe that's life's silent punishment, to show us too late what we had and what we let go. Marcus didn't come to accuse me. He brought no resentment, just presence, and that's what tears me up the most. Realizing that even with every reason to walk away, he was the only one who stayed. Sometimes, the person we once labeled unstable is the only one with roots. The next day I was quiet, thoughtful, and all day long I waited heart tight for the night. Marcus hadn't promised he'd return, hadn't even said a word about it, but I knew he would. Somehow, I just knew. Night came slowly, dragging a cold wind that made the curtains in my room dance. I was awake, but kept my eyes half closed, pretending to sleep. Part of me needed to face that moment. The other wanted to run from it. I knew he would come, and he did. Marcus came in as he always did, without knocking, yet carrying a kind of respect that seemed to apologize to the in itself. He sat in the same chair as always, as if that space already belonged to him. He looked at me for a few seconds, maybe trying to memorize the contours of my face, maybe just checking that I was still breathing. This time, he brought something in his hands. Not flowers, not cards, just a single flower. Simple, small, but alive. A nearly imperceptible gesture, yet it shattered something deep inside me. He didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. Words had failed us years ago. Only gestures remained, and that one was enough to break everything in me. He placed the flower on the table, right next to the half-empty glass of water my husband always left, and then he sat there, breathing with me, accompanying me with his eyes, as if his presence alone could somehow stitch back together what time had torn apart. He didn't bring speeches or apologies, only the flower. And that's when I understood that love, when it's real, doesn't need to be explained. It just is. I remembered a quote I read years ago. True love doesn't knock on the door, it enters through the cracks. And Marcus, he lived in every one of my cracks. The ones I hid from the world, the ones my husband never cared to see, the ones I myself avoided touching. When Marcus stood to leave, he paused for a moment at my side. I thought he might say something, but he only smiled again, that same sad, peaceful smile of someone who knows certain things no longer need words. The door closed gently behind him, and with it, something inside me went quiet too. I cried not for what could have been, but for what I destroyed, thinking I was doing the right thing. Marcus wouldn't come back. I knew that. That flower wasn't a beginning, it was a goodbye. But unlike all the other absences I'd known, this one had presence. A presence that hurt more than all the absences in my own home, because he was here, even after everything, even when no one else was. and that in itself was the loudest gesture could ever make. I went back home on a gray morning. Even the sky didn't bother to smile. My husband picked me up from the hospital in a rush, like checking off a task from a list. "The doctor said you'll need to rest," he said, without even looking me in the eyes. I just nodded. The drive home was silent. The radio was off, and I felt like a piece of furniture being moved from one place to another, useful, but emotionally weightless. When I stepped into the house, I was greeted by the familiar coldness of furniture, smells, footsteps. Nothing embraced me. Not the couch, not the hallway, not the pictures on the wall. Everything felt distant. I was back in the place where I had lived for decades, but I didn't feel at home. It was in the bedroom, alone, sitting on the edge of the bed, that the memory cut through me like a sharp blade. The night I chose to betray Marcus. It wasn't a physical betrayal. It was worse. It was the moment I looked into his eyes and lied. I said I was confused, that I needed time, that maybe it was better if we each went our separate ways. The truth is, I had already chosen the other man. I chose the more stable one, the more ready one, the one who seemed like less of a risk. I remember Marcus's expression that night. He didn't cry, but his was the loudest sound I've ever heard in my life. He left without shouting, without demanding answers. He simply walked away, and with him, he took the last part of me that still believed in love without conditions. At the time, I convinced myself I had done the right thing, that Marcus would have a better life without me, that he needed to grow up, that I needed someone more grounded. But now, years later, he visits me on the edge of a possible goodbye, and without asking for anything, he just shows up, taking care of me, leaving invisible flowers on the hospital floor, reminding me of who I was and who I could have been if I'd chosen differently. It's ironic, isn't it? Life isn't punishing me for the pain I endured, but for the pain I caused. The regret didn't come from the years of neglect I lived beside an absent husband. It came from what I left behind, from what I wounded without understanding its worth. I planted thorns in a heart that only wanted to protect me. And years later, I found roses left by him at the most vulnerable moment of my life. Guilt tastes like metal, bitter. It lingers in your mouth for days, even when you try to swallow it down. It doesn't scream, but it whispers truths you've been avoiding for years. Lying in bed in my own room, with a pillow that no longer smells like anything, I stared at the ceiling and asked myself, how do you live with the knowledge that you walked away from the only real love you ever had? I still don't know the answer, but I do know this. After everything, Marcus's silent visit was the only thing that made me feel alive in recent days. And maybe that's the greatest irony in my story. The one I hurt was the one who saved me from myself. A few days after being discharged, I looked in the mirror for the first time, really looked. Not that rushed, functional glance to fix my hair or search for flaws. It was a deep look, uncomfortable, almost surgical, like someone searching for something long lost. And what I found was a stranger. The features were mine, the wrinkles around my eyes, the soft spots on my chest, the curve of my shoulders. But the gaze, that vibrant gaze that once smiled just at Marcus's presence, was gone. In its place, there was exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, but the kind that comes from carrying the weight of holding up a structure long after all the internal beams have collapsed. Who was that woman? Where was the Olivia from before? The one who laughed easily, the one who danced alone in the kitchen, the one who wrote notes and stuck them on the fridge, hearts drawn unevenly in red ink. I asked myself, with honesty and pain, at what moment did I stop being me to fit into the life I chose? The answer came like an uncomfortable whisper. The moment I accepted less than I deserved, believing it was the most I could have. That woman in love with life, with little things, with fresh coffee and conversations that ran into the night she had been dying slowly, dying a little every time I swallowed words just to avoid a fight, dying every time I looked into my husband's eyes and saw only fatigue, not admiration, dying every time I longed to be seen and was ignored. We don't lose ourselves all at once. We unravel thread by thread, and when we finally notice, we're completely disconnected from the person we once were. I realized I had become exactly what was expected of me, a functional wife, a present mother, a stable woman, but I stopped being a felt woman, a living woman, a whole woman. I spent so much time trying to keep the peace in the house that I let emotional chaos settle inside me. And now, after the surgery, the absence of my family, the unexpected presence of Marcus, it all came rushing up like a suffocated tidal wave. I nearly had to die to finally ask myself, who am I when no one's looking? And the answer scared me, because I didn't know, or maybe I was beginning to remember. There, in front of the mirror, I saw myself for the first time without the social labels stuck to my skin. No title of wife, no obligation to be strong, no pressure to look okay. Just me. And deep in that tired reflection, there was something still alive. Small, wounded, but alive. The woman I used to be still existed. She was just buried. And for the first time in years, I wanted to dig. Not for Marcus. Not for anyone. For me. Life resumed its usual pace. At least on the surface. Coffee on the table at 7 a.m. while he reads the newspaper. The kids' now hurried adults exchange scattered words before rushing out, as if life were just a train station where no one says goodbye with care. Everything was the same, but I wasn't. It was as if I now saw every gesture, every absence through a new lens, as if I had lived in a fog for years, and the sterile light of the hospital had finally cleared my view. And what I saw hurt. It hurt to realize that my husband only asked, "Feeling better?" the way someone asks if the rain will let up. It hurt to see that no one in the house noticed the weight of what I had just gone through. Worse still, they never really had, because I never let myself be truly noticed. I was the wall that holds everything up but no one looks at. The routine, which had once given me a sense of purpose, now felt like a poorly rehearsed play. Everything repeated, everything automatic, everything dead. And that's when I began to understand. We don't die just once. We die a little more each day we swallow our tears alone in the bathroom, with every forced smile at the dinner table, with every never mind that carries the weight of a life swallowed whole, with every time you look at your partner and realize he no longer listens, or worse, maybe he never really did, with every time you're sick and still, you're the one asking if everyone else is okay. These are the small deaths, and they're the ones that bury who we once were, piece by piece. I remember one specific day. It had been a week since I came home from the hospital. I was washing the dishes, my hand still weak, and I let a glass slip. It fell to the floor and shattered, shards everywhere. My husband walked into the kitchen, looked at the pieces, and without saying a word, picked up a rag and left. No, "Are you okay?" No worried glance, just another broken glass, just another cracked woman. And in that moment I understood. The problem isn't when someone hurts you, it's when they break you and act like it's normal. I went back to sweeping the shards, tears in my eyes, but it wasn't about the glass, it was me. I had been breaking all along, in tiny, invisible, indifferent fragments. And no one, not even I, had stopped to ask, can I still be put back together? I still don't know the answer, but the question alone made me feel alive. And at this stage of life, truly feeling alive was already a beginning. That afternoon, I sat on the living room couch like I had for years. The sunlight slipped in through the curtains, brushing gently against the armchair where my husband sat reading. It was an ordinary scene, repeated 1,000 times, and for that very reason it hurt. He flipped the pages of the newspaper with that neutral expression, not happy, not sad, just absent, as if his role in life was to exist, but never interfere too much. And there, sitting in, I realized something that hurt more than any absence. We were still here, in the same space, in the same house, in the same routine, but there was no longer an us. There were two survivors of an old agreement, an emotional contract that over time became nothing more than protocol. My eyes wandered around the room, the vase he bought on a business trip, the paintings chosen from a catalog, the stacks of books no one ever read. Everything looked beautiful, well-placed, functional. A perfect house just like our life appeared to be on the outside, but inside it was a prison, an elegant one, with wine glasses in the cupboard, white towels, and dinners at 8 p.m., a golden cage. And I was the bird decorating the scenery, singing less and less, breathing less and less. The cruelest part of this prison was knowing I helped build every single bar. I accepted signed every surrender, negotiated every part of myself in the name of a peace that deep down never existed. And there, sitting in that same room where I had so often served coffee and pretended to be fine, I saw it all with brutal clarity. The love had ended long ago. Maybe it never even existed the way I imagined. But convenience, comfort, fear, those kept the facade standing. "Everything okay?" he asked, without lifting his eyes from the newspaper. Yes, it is. Lying had become a habit. And the worst part, he didn't even question the answer, because he knew too. He knew there was no more us, but he preferred to keep things as they were. After all, it's easier to live with emptiness than to face the abyss of truth. That night, I lay beside him, my body light from the bath, my heart heavy with clarity, and I realized something terrible. The prison I was in had no locks. I could leave, but I was afraid of what I'd find outside. The golden cage is made of comfort too, of stability, of appearances, and those who live in it for too long forget what it's like to fly. But inside me, a question had begun to grow, timid, yet relentless. What if I dared to open the door? At the end of that week, something pulled me to the back of the closet. I don't know exactly what I was looking for. Maybe a distraction, maybe an unconscious gesture of escape. But I found a box, small, thick paper, tied with an old, faded ribbon. The box of things that once meant everything, and were later buried by time. Inside were notes, photos, fragments of memories that had resisted the dust, things from Marcus, things from me, back when we were a wee, messy, imperfect, but real. I opened the first note. Today you said you wanted to fly. I'd give you wings if I could, but for now I can offer you coffee, and I know you like those too. I didn't remember that exact day, but I remembered the feeling of being heard even when I said nothing. I kept digging through the box. A photo of us at a flower stand, me smiling, him trying to balance a vase on his head just to make me laugh, a folded movie ticket, a lock of my hair. He had asked for it when I cut it, saying he wanted to keep a piece of the summer you carry in your strands. And then I found a small blue notebook. I opened it. Inside were scattered notes, little thoughts, his reflections about me. Today she cried but smiled right after. She always does that. Like she knows pain is just a hallway between two places. She goes quiet when she's scared, but her eyes scream. No one seems to notice, but I do. If she ever leaves, I hope she takes at least a piece of what we planted here, because it was real. I know it was. I closed the notebook with trembling hands. I had forgotten, or rather, I chose to forget. I worked so hard to erase Marcus from my story that I ended up erasing parts of myself, the best parts, the parts that knew how to love, that knew how to laugh without fear, that never asked permission to exist. Those words, written in old ink, pierced me deeper than any fight, any absence, any in my marriage, because they came from someone who saw all of me and still stayed for as long as he could. Marcus wasn't perfect. We had our differences, our misalignments, but his love was presence. It was gaze. It was attention. And I traded all of that for promises of safety that never came. I put the box back, not out of shame, but out of respect, because now I understood. Those traces were all that remained of a love that didn't need to last to be eternal. Some marks don't fade. They simply wait for us to have the courage to return and feel them. The next day, I made 2 cups of coffee. I'm not sure why. Maybe impulse, maybe longing, maybe hope, the kind I pretended not to have. I left one on the table, beside the dried flower I'd kept, and stared at the door for long minutes, as if something in me still believed he might show up again. Like that day in the hospital, when I opened my eyes and he was just there, silent, whole, present. But he didn't come. Not that day, not the next, not ever again. And that's when I understood that flower was a goodbye. Discreet, dignified, true to the he always knew how to respect. I felt something wilt inside me. My throat tightened. It wasn't physical pain. It was a kind of grief that doesn't wear black, doesn't receive condolences, doesn't get a ceremony. It's the mourning of something that still exists inside you, but no longer has a place in the real world. I spent the week pretending everything was normal, forced to smile at lunch with my children, did the laundry, organized the bookshelf, everything on autopilot, everything as if I were whole. But every night, without fail, I caught myself staring at the window, waiting for a shadow, a note, any sign, and nothing came. Not a sound, not a name muttered by accident, not a memory that didn't hurt, until, in one of those essays, a thought stopped me cold. I was waiting for someone to come back and save me from the life I chose. And Marcus, he wouldn't come. Not because he didn't care, but because unlike me, he knew when to go. I felt anger for a moment, anger at myself, for missing the right time for everything. But it didn't last, because soon, something stronger came. Acceptance. He left because he had to, because he deserved to, because he had already done what was his to do. He reminded me of who I was, and maybe that's the greatest act of love anyone can offer. Not insisting on staying, but leaving something true before they go. The visit never came, and now I know it never will. But the memory that stays, like a soft echo, a dried flower, a note that won't fade. Breakfast was served like always. Bread on the tray, butter, 2 cups, folded newspaper, the television murmuring the morning news, everything in its proper place, apparently. My husband sat at the table and asked, without lifting his eyes, "Did you sleep well?" I did. "Do you want to go out today? I can take you if you want." "No, thank you." Those short, rehearsed dialogues had been our choreography for years. Like a well-worn script no one believed in anymore, but we kept repeating out of habit, or cowardice. The farce of normalcy is comfortable. You smile at the neighbors, buy bread from the same baker, post photos on holidays, and answer, "I'm fine," even when everything inside you is collapsing, and on the outside, everything seems to function. After all, there are no fights, no scandals, no drama, no anything, and that's what hurts the most. There's nothing. I watched my husband chew. Same gestures, same boredom in his eyes, and I asked myself, does he feel it too? Is there an emptiness inside him somewhere? Or did he just adapt better to the absence of feeling? Because deep down, that's what united us now. The lack of everything that once brought us here. Breakfast ended, he stood up with his cup in hand. "Need anything?" "No." And he left the room. That was it. 29 years, 3 children, 2 countries visited together. A life built, collapsed, and now held together by inertia. I wanted to cry, but even that didn't come easily anymore. All I felt was a dense emptiness, like a room sealed shut for years, where the air is too heavy to breathe. I went back to the bedroom, lay down, stared at the ceiling, like I did in the hospital. But now, there was no Marcus, no flowers, no chair filled with presents, only the certainty that I was alive, in a place where no one truly saw me. The farce of normalcy comes at a high cost. It forces you to smile with your lips while your eyes slowly die, and I was tired. Not of living with him, but of pretending that this was living at all. It was the middle of the afternoon. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels loud in how present it is. I was alone in the room, sitting on the edge of the bed, bare feet touching the cold floor, staring at the closed door. And then without warning, without rehearsal, without drama, I said, "I don't love him anymore." The words came out soft, low, almost a whisper, but it was the first truth that had left my mouth whole in years. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just breathed, as if air had finally returned to my chest after being held in for far too long, as if, for a single second, the weight of the lie had dropped to the floor, and I could finally sit with my own story, without disguise. I don't love him anymore. I replayed that sentence in my head 3 times, asked myself how long I'd known it, maybe 10 years, maybe 15, or maybe since the very beginning, and I had only now found the courage to admit it. It wasn't hate, or anger, or raw resentment. It was a quiet emptiness. An absence that didn't scream, but was present in everything. In the way he held the cup, in how he walked out without looking back, in the way he said good night, like closing a drawer, and in my every day. The truth when it arrives doesn't need to be loud. It just settles in, and once it does, nothing fits quite the same again. I ran my hand over the bed sheets, fluffed the pillow, did small things to keep the mind busy, but it always circled back to, "You don't love him anymore." I didn't tell anyone, didn't scream, didn't write it down, but I repeated it to myself, like someone trying to memorize a new name after a lifetime using the wrong one. That afternoon, I felt a kind of respect for myself. For the first time, I didn't lie to me, and even though I knew it wouldn't change my life in any practical way, not yet, at least that phrase, whispered into an empty room, was a beginning, a quiet start, a crack in the inner wall, and sometimes it's through a crack that the light gets in. I wrote a letter, no plan, no revision, no draft. I sat at the table with a blank page and a blue pen, the same shade as Marcus's eyes, now that I think of it, and let the words spill out, as if they'd been waiting years for a way through. It wasn't a love letter, it was a letter of forgiveness, not asking to be forgiven in the usual sense, not expecting acceptance or return, but to release what had stayed trapped inside me for far too long. I started simple. "Marcus, maybe this letter will never reach you, and maybe it shouldn't. I don't write to open a path back, but to close within myself the road I should never have left so carelessly." And I went on, slowly. I spoke of the choice I made, of the reasons I thought I had, of the pressures I didn't even realize were shaping me at the time. I wrote about the fear because that's what truly moved me, much more than any kind of certainty. I admitted I ran away, not from you, but from myself, from the kind of love you gave me, the kind that demands real presence, honest surrender, vulnerability, and I wasn't ready. I told you the stability I chased turned into a prison, that the marriage that once looked like safety became pure absence, that you were the only real presence I ever had, precisely when I least deserved it. You saw me fall, and still you offered, in the shape of a flower, and I only knew how to look away. I wrote that I didn't expect a response, or a reunion, not even forgiveness, because maybe by now, it wasn't even necessary, but I needed those words to exist somewhere, even if only on paper, even if they were never read, because keeping it all inside was sentencing myself to a kind of death that doesn't show up on a certificate. I ended it like this. You were, for a brief time, everything I needed, and even so, it was enough to remind me of who I once was. Thank you for staying, and thank you, even more, for leaving. I signed it simply, Olivia, and I placed the letter in the deepest drawer of the desk, not to hide it but to honor it. Forgiveness doesn't need an audience. Sometimes it's just this. The courage to admit you were wrong, and the dignity to expect nothing in return. The changes didn't come with shouting, nor with grand radical decisions. They began with small things, almost invisible ones. I started walking slower around the house, not out of exhaustion, but by choice. Noticing details my eyes had ignored for years, the sound the kettle made just before it whistled, the way the morning light touched the kitchen floor, the scent of bread warming in the toaster. None of it was new, but it all felt rediscovered. I started writing again, nothing elaborate, just scattered phrases in a notebook, daily thoughts, things I felt, memories that came uninvited, sometimes just a single line. Today, I listened to and it didn't scream. I started choosing my clothes more carefully, not to please anyone, but to remember myself. Wearing lipstick I had stopped using because it didn't suit my age. Tying my hair in a way that made me feel lighter. Small, private revolutions. My husband noticed. He mentioned it once or twice. "You've been dressing up more lately." "I'm remembering who I am," I answered. No explanations. He didn't press. Maybe he didn't know what to ask. Maybe he was afraid of the answers. And strangely, even though we shared the same house, slept in the same bed, the distance between us had never felt so clear, and oddly, that brought me peace, because now I knew I didn't need to fill that space, didn't need to pretend anymore, didn't need to fix something that, truthfully, had never existed the way I believed it did. My focus was no longer on saving a marriage. It was on saving myself. I brought back the habit of playing music while I cooked. Old songs. The kind Marcus used to play in the car during short trips just to watch me sing. I cried to a few, smiled to others, but above all, I breathed, deeply, like someone who dove too deep, and upon surfacing, realizes that air has a taste. It wasn't an escape. It was a return, not to a specific time, but to a feeling of being alive in my own skin. Some women end marriages, move to new cities, write books. Others return to themselves without anyone noticing. And that's exactly what I did. I came back to myself, and I breathed, for the first time in many years, freely. People still see me the same way. The dedicated wife, the calm woman, the one who seems to have everything in place. They say I'm strong, that I'm a pillar, that I hold the family up like a quiet wall. And maybe I was, yes. But now, I know inside, I'm something else. I'm what I hide in the pauses between tasks. I'm the woman who writes letters she'll never send, who serves dinner while hearing, in memory, the music once played in an old car, wind tangling her hair, a certain pair of eyes smiling from the seat beside her. Marcus, yes, I still think of him, but not as someone waiting, not as someone hoping for a return. I don't wake up expecting a note. I don't glance at my phone imagining a message. I don't count days. I don't mark dates. The flame doesn't burn, but it also never went out. It exists discreet, like a candle lit in a locked room. It doesn't light the whole house, but it keeps the memory of warmth alive. And sometimes, when everything around me feels too cold, I go into that inner room and sit in, just to remember that I was once truly loved, even if only for a short time, even if I was the one who destroyed it. No one needs to know that sometimes, when I'm alone, I reread the notes he wrote. No one needs to know I kept that dried flower in a small blue box, wrapped in an old scarf. No one needs to know that, even though I've accepted he's not coming back, I still speak to his absence like someone comforting a part of the chest that never fully closed. My husband hasn't noticed the change. Maybe because he doesn't want to. Maybe because he's so settled into sameness that any lightness looks like just a phase. He continues with his routine, his schedules, his comments on the news. He asks if everything's okay, and accepts my yes without ever questioning it. Because our works better than any truth. And that's fine. I don't hate him. He doesn't hate me. We're two survivors of an old decision, living in a space where nothing explodes but everything erodes. At dinner, he pours the wine. I smile. He asks about my day. I give a carefully edited version, and life goes on. But inside me, the narrative is different. It's the story of a woman who got tired of being invisible, who accepted she made the wrong choice, but refuses to spend the rest of her years living on autopilot. A woman who, even within the same marriage, chose to be reborn in secret. No one needs to know that when I'm quiet, it isn't loneliness. It's protection. That when I close my eyes, sometimes I see Marcus standing in the hospital doorway, holding a flower. That deep down, I've made peace with the fact that he won't return, and that it doesn't need to be a wound, but a lesson. The guilt is still here. It walks with me, sits at the table, sleeps beside me. But now, I treat it with respect. It reminds me of what I lost, but also of what I've found again, myself. I no longer wait for miracles, or forgiveness, or alternate endings. But sometimes, at night, while looking at the sky through the living room window, I wonder how he's doing, where he is, if he still thinks of me, if he still remembers the sound of my laugh, the one I now save for myself. No one needs to know these things, because they're mine. And maybe, for the first time in my life, that's enough. The house was always big enough. It held everything. The furniture, the children, it had space for Sunday dinners, for vacation bags, for my husband's quiet, and for the emotional absences I masked with routine. It was a planned house, thought out, filled with beams of light, wide windows, walls in neutral tones. Everything matched. Everything worked. There are moments that split a life in two, before and after. And sometimes, that turning point doesn't come with shouting or slamming doors. It comes like a quiet click, a brief sound, a tiny detail that shifts everything. In my case, it was an unlocked phone, left on the corner of the kitchen table. It was an afternoon like any other, I was washing the lunch dishes while he wrapped up a call in the hallway. I heard muffled laughter, a short goodbye. When he came back in, he set the phone down beside the fruit bowl and said, "I'm going to lie down for a bit," and headed upstairs. I stayed, cleaning, tidying, trying to ignore the lump in my throat that had been sitting there for weeks. But something about that laugh on the phone, that lightness in his voice bothered me, and for the first time in years, I gave in to the impulse. The few seconds it took to reach for the phone felt like hours. I didn't know what I was looking for. Not really. I only knew what I'd been avoiding. And as I picked up the phone, my hands already trembling, I realized something painful, something sharp and quiet, was about to be confirmed. It wasn't about betrayal, not just that. It was about displacement, about the feeling of being a piece of furniture in someone else's life, of watching him offer laughter and softness to a voice on the other end while I served his meals in. The screen was already open on a message, not dramatic, not scandalous, but intimate enough to make me feel more invisible than I'd ever felt in all these years of quiet dinners and polite questions. A simple sentence, sent earlier that day. "Wish you were here to share this coffee with me." No emojis, no names, no dates, just that. And it was enough, because what it told me was that he did have warmth in him, that he could be present, that the version of him I'd begged for all these years wasn't dead. It had just never been meant for me. I placed the phone back exactly where it was. I wiped my hands on the towel. I stared at the sink, and then I sat down, slowly, on the edge of the chair, and just breathed. I didn't feel rage, not even betrayal, only confirmation. Confirmation that I'd been right all along about the emptiness, about the absence, about the fact that I was no longer a part of the life we built, just an accessory to maintain its appearance. And maybe that moment, that click of an unlocked screen, wasn't the explosion. It was the closure, the quiet, undeniable line that separated everything that came before from what was about to come next. And as I sat there, hearing nothing but the murmur of the TV from upstairs, I whispered to myself, not with tears, not with anger, but with certainty, I deserve to take up space in my own life. And the house, once too big, then too small, suddenly became something else entirely. Temporary. I picked up the phone. It was still unlocked. I opened the messages. I didn't have to search for long. There they were, recent conversations, dialogues laced with intimate codes, thinly veiled emojis, phrases heavy with shared secrets, with desire, with intimacy, with life, the very kind he had stopped offering me long ago. I stopped at one specific exchange. She wrote, "Last night is still on my skin." He replied, "I couldn't sleep either, thinking about you," and I felt the floor give way, but I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply placed the phone back on the table with the care of someone returning a weapon that had already fired. I climbed the stairs slowly. He was sleeping, as if the world were still the same. I looked at the man I had shared decades with, children, travels, promises, and I asked myself, when did he stop being mine? Or worse, was he ever mine at all? I sat on the edge of the bed. He opened his eyes slowly, startled by how close I was. "Hi, everything okay? Is she pretty?" He furrowed his brow. "What?" "The woman you spent the night with, the one who still feels you on her skin." That followed was more brutal than any scream. He didn't deny it, didn't try to lie, didn't ask how I found out. He just closed his eyes for a few seconds, as if accepting that something had been discovered too late to fix. I stood up, my breathing steady, my hands light. There was no hysteria, just truth. "It's okay," I said. "I betrayed you too." He jolted upright. "What?" I smiled, a small, tired smile, not with my body, with my soul. "And long before you did, he didn't understand, and maybe he never will." I walked downstairs and locked myself in the bathroom, and only there did I finally cry. A silent cry, soundless. The kind that flows straight from the chest to the face without warning. I thought of everything I had left behind when I married him. The small dreams, the everyday desires, the lightness, the long laughter, the scent of freedom, the plans with no map. Marcus, none of those things came with me into this marriage, and now there was nothing left to bring back. That night, he didn't try to explain. We had dinner in, slept in the same bed, but everything was different. Now, he was the unfaithful one, and I, the betrayed woman. But the real betrayal had happened much earlier, when I accepted a life that never fit me and called it love. There was no separation, no suitcases by the door, no broken plates or raised voices. The betrayal was found, acknowledged, and quietly accommodated. Like so many other things we learn to swallow when we're too tired to fight. We lived under the same roof, like polite neighbors, like accomplices in a secret that no longer scandalized us, like two strangers who know each other too well to pretend they don't know exactly where it hurts. He kept sleeping in our bedroom. I kept tending to the house. The routine continued outwardly untouched, as if nothing had happened. But inside me, something finally cracked for good. It was as if an inner door had closed forever. A part of me simply shut off, not in anger, not out of revenge, but from exhaustion. exhaustion. There was nothing more to expect from him. Not from him, nor from the life we had built. I stopped expecting flowers. I stopped expecting change. I stopped expecting even an apology. Because by then, I didn't want forgiveness. I wanted, and he gave me that. In that, I discovered that half of me was still trying to breathe, and the other half had already given up. I cooked, I smiled, I answered calls, I showed up for birthdays and holidays, but it was all automatic, all fragmented. I began watching my own life like someone stuck watching a bad movie, one you can't walk out of because you're already halfway in, and you just want to see how it ends. Sometimes at night, lying beside him, I'd ask myself, how did I get here? And the answer was always the same, one step at a time, in saying I'm fine, while everything inside me fell apart. Now, all I felt was this lukewarm exhaustion, this bitter acceptance that my fate was to live with the man who had betrayed me, just as he would live with the woman who had disappointed him. Maybe that was our karma. Two people who fooled themselves together, now holding up a play that no longer has an audience. I thought about leaving, but leave, to where? With what strength? With what excuse? By now, the kids had their own lives. Friends were few, family distant. All that remained was me, and this man I had shared decades with. And now, betrayal. We never spoke about her, or the phone, or what I'd said that day. It was as if it had all been absorbed into some unspoken agreement. We pretend nothing changed and go on surviving. But inside me, something was slowly shifting. One part of me wanted to scream. Another just wanted peace. And somewhere between those two halves, I learned to live with the idea that maybe half of me would never speak again, but the other half still breathes, and for now, that has to be enough. After the betrayal, after the bitter acceptance, I built a place inside myself where no one else can enter. An invisible room, no windows, no door facing outward, just one key tucked away inside my chest. I go there alone, no noise, no rush, no one ever knows. It's where I keep what's left of me, what hasn't been touched by lies, by exhaustion, by the life I accepted out of fear, or resignation, or pure depletion. It's the room where my voice still exists, where the memory of a whole woman still lives, where my abandoned dreams reside, where my feelings for Marcus remain. Yes, he still lives in that space, not as a fantasy, not as a hope, but as root. There, he doesn't judge me. He doesn't ask why I stayed, why I accepted, why I still sleep beside a man who betrayed me. In the room I locked from the inside, Marcus just looks at me, with that same gentle gaze he gave me in the hospital when he didn't ask for anything, just stood there. And it's to that room I return when everything out here feels too tight, when my husband comes home late and avoids my eyes, when dinner is chewed in, when night falls and I realize I'm still here, but haven't truly lived in a very long time. That room is my only refuge now. No one notices. Outwardly, I'm the same, but inside, I'm no longer here. I move through the house, say, good morning. I plan the day's tasks like it's just another Monday, but the entire time, I'm in that room, writing invisible memories, speaking with the woman I used to be, apologizing to her for everything I stopped being. Last night, I dreamed that the room had a balcony, and from it, I could see the ocean. It was a sea I don't know, but in the dream, I knew it was mine. I woke up with wet eyes, but I didn't cry. There are no more tears left, only emptiness, spaces where once there was expectation, and today, there's only maintenance. I wash the dishes, tend to the plants, read messages from the kids, but with each gesture, I close the door to that room a little more, not out of revenge, but out of self-preservation, because I've finally understood no one is coming to rescue me. The only thing I can do now is protect what little is left of myself, and that I will do, even if it means disappearing on the inside just to keep existing on the outside. It's not the betrayal that hurts the most. It's what comes after, the no one names. The cautious walking through the house, as if each step is a reminder that there's no more truth between these walls. It's waking up every day next to a man who's become a stranger not because of what he did, but because of what he stopped being. And above all, it's living with the question that whispers through the rhythms of every ordinary day. Why did I stay? It wasn't for love. It wasn't for hope. I stayed because leaving takes strength, because starting over isn't romantic, it's brutal. Because freedom, when it arrives late, demands a price that often feels too high to pay. I stayed because I was afraid to break, afraid to explain things to the kids, afraid to face the eyes of others, afraid to live alone after so long surrounded by a lie. And also, I stayed because in some strange way, I believed this was what I deserved. The woman I once was, she would have left. She would have slammed the door, packed a bag, rented a tiny apartment that smelled like beginnings. She would have rebuilt her life with courage, made new plans, maybe even rediscovered love. But that woman, she got left behind. And the one who stayed got used to the ashes, to dinners to birthdays faking normal, to clothes washed out of duty, not care. Yes, I stayed, but the cost is steep. I carry in my body the exhaustion of every word I didn't say, I carry in my chest the guilt of having built a world where I was never truly happy. I carry in my soul the regret of letting Marcus go and never having had the courage to tell him the truth, because that's another part of the weight. He never knew. Never knew I stayed. Not because of him, but because of everything I lacked to choose myself. And now, living in this home has become a constant exercise in survival. There's no more expectation, only maintenance. And the cruelest part? No one notices. People look at me and see a mature woman, stable, married, with a beautiful home and grown children. They don't see the emptiness. They don't see the body that wakes up already exhausted from carrying the weight of all the places I never went. They don't hear the soul screaming in every time he calls from the kitchen, "Can you bring me a coffee?" as if nothing ever happened. And the worst part is, in a way, nothing did. Everything stayed the same. The routine, the quiet performance. The only difference is that now I know, and that knowing weighs. It weighs like a body that no longer fits into its own rhythm. It weighs like emotional baggage that no time can fully unpack. It weighs like a love that was never lived and now exists only as a shadow in the room I locked from the inside. Still, I stayed, and I'll keep staying, because leaving at this stage of life is no longer a beginning. It's just another way of running, and I don't want to run anymore. I want, at the very least, to learn how to walk lightly under the weight I chose to carry. It had been years since I spent more than a few hours at my mother's house. Short visits, birthdays, occasions with cake and safe conversations. There was always a reason not to stay. Appointments, routine, the husband, the fatigue. But that weekend, I went. No explanations. Just said, "Mom, I'm staying with you for a few days." And she, as always, answered with that simplicity that somehow feels like it holds the whole world. "This house is yours, Filha. Just come." I arrived on a Friday afternoon with a light suitcase and a heart utterly exhausted. The house still smelled the same. Fresh coffee mixed with coconut soap. The same floral couch. The framed photos of grandkids, all slightly crooked. And that, not the kind that suffocates, but the kind that holds you. She welcomed me with a long hug. No questions. No pressure. Just that warmth no word could ever replace. At dinner we talked about the kids. A neighbor who fell and broke her arm. The novella. Simple things. Safe things. But in every gesture and how she served me rice, how she adjusted the tablecloth, how she touched my shoulder in passing, there was something I hadn't felt in so long, real presence. Sleeping in that house felt like being cradled by an old memory. I laid in the guest room bed and, for the first time in months, I didn't hear the loud of my own home, just the tick-tock of the old wall clock and the wind rustling the leaves of the goyaba tree in the yard. The next morning, I woke up before her and took my coffee out to the porch. The sky was still gray, but the air felt lighter than it had in years. She appeared a little later, hair in a bun, wearing those same old slippers that live in my memories of her. "Did you sleep well?" I did. She looked at me for a moment. "You're sad, aren't you?" I looked at her, startled. Not because she asked, but because she knew. "I am," I said. No script. No fear. She sat beside me. "Want to talk?" "Not yet, but thank you for not forcing me." She smiled. The kind of smile of someone who's lived every pain I'm just beginning to name. We spent the day we made carrot cake, did laundry, picked herbs in the garden, laughed at old stories. I listened to her humming while sweeping the kitchen, and it made me cry on the inside because it had been years since I'd heard someone sing just for the joy of being alive. That night, we watched an old movie together, wrapped in a blanket. She fell asleep before the end, her head resting on my shoulder. And right there, with her gently snoring beside me, I realized something. That weekend wasn't an escape. It was a homecoming, not to a house, but to myself, to the woman I was before I was a wife, a mother, a survivor of a collapsed marriage. In that small, simple house with its glass jars, old photos, and the scent of soap and cake, I breathed fully, and for the first time in what felt like decades, I didn't feel like I had to apologize for needing air. For the first time in a long time, I heard myself, and what I heard wasn't screaming, or pain, or guilt. It was just a whisper, "You're still here." On Sunday, while I was packing my suitcase to head back, my mom looked at me sideways. "You know, sweetie, there are people we don't need to forgive. Just leave them where they are." I nodded, holding back tears. "And there are places we can't live in, only visit." I smiled, because I understood. That house was my refuge. But my battlefield was still waiting for me, and as much as it hurt, I knew I had to go back. Sunday dawned gray, but not the kind of gray that promises rain. It was that dull, silent gray that seems to freeze time. The kind of sky that goes well with goodbyes, with packed bags, and with returns that don't feel like choices. My mom hugged me at the door with the silent strength of someone who knows the world is heavy, but still lets her daughter go. "Take it slow, okay?" she said. "I will, Mom. Thank you for everything. Anything you need, I know. I'll call." She didn't say anything else. She just stood at the door, watching my car slowly disappear, as if she could hold on with her eyes to the little piece I had left, Driving back home had never felt so heavy. The car followed the straight road, but my mind didn't. It rewound, fast, forwarded, skipped memories, scenes from the past few days, my mom's coffee aroma, the breeze on the porch, the carrot cake, the comforting, those little things that, for a moment, made me feel alive again, whole. But with every kilometer behind me, something inside me started to close, like a door slowly locking again. The road felt longer, the horizon farther, and my soul heavier. I tried putting on some music. Nothing fit. Everything sounded too loud, too sad, or just out of place. I turned off the radio. That's when the car started pulling to the side. I thought it was the road, then maybe the wind, until I heard the unmistakable sound. I pulled over, flat tire. For a moment, I just stared at it, as if it were too much of a metaphor for a single Sunday, as if the universe was playing a tasteless joke, just to remind me that no matter how deep you breathe, life will always find a way to challenge you. I got out, walked around the car, looked around. No one. Checked my phone. No signal. Got back in. Sat in the driver's seat with my head in my hands, and I cried. But it wasn't the clean kind of crying, not a release. It was a tired cry, heavy, bitter. I cried for my husband's betrayal. I cried for all the times I stayed silent, for the letters I never sent, for the feelings I buried, for the words I swallowed, for the woman I'd become. I cried for me. I cried because sometimes it doesn't feel like the universe is testing you. It feels like it's laughing at your efforts to stay on your feet. I stayed there for a few minutes, just existing. That's when I heard the footsteps, slow, rhythmic, approaching over the gravel. I lifted my head. The sun had torn through a patch in the gray sky. A soft beam of light pierced the dust. He was walking toward me, against the light. Light shirt, dark pants, serene posture. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. But when the silhouette came closer, when the outline of his face came into focus, I realized it wasn't a daydream. It was Marcus. He looked at the car, looked at me, and said, without recognizing me, "Everything okay? Need some help?" I froze. The voice, the tone, the calm, all the same. But he didn't recognize me. Maybe because my hair was up, or the dark circles under my eyes, or maybe because, after all this time, I really was different. "I think I got a flat tire," I said, my voice raspier than I expected. He came closer, stopped one step away, looked at me more carefully, and then recognition dawned. "Olivia?" I nodded. Just slightly. Lowered his eyes for a moment. He took a deep breath, then looked at me again, more gently. "May I?" I nodded again. We went to the trunk together. He grabbed the spare, the tools. While he changed the tire, time seemed to stop. We didn't talk about the past, not about the hospital, not about the marriage. He just worked in, and I watched him every move, every detail, as if I were watching a man who only existed in memory. "You still around here?" I asked. He gave a small smile, eyes still on the wheel. "I visit my mom on Sundays. She still lives in town. I imagine she's well. I'm surviving," he said, and his eyes met mine for a second. We went silent again. When he finished, he stood up, wiped his hands on his pants, and said, "You're good to go. Thank you. You're welcome." There was a pause. That kind of pause that holds everything that was never said. That kind of pause that could turn into a hug or a new beginning. But it didn't. "Take care, Olivia. You too, Marcus." He nodded, turned slowly, and walked away, without looking back. I got into the car with my hands still trembling. For a few minutes, I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, listening to the wind, feeling my heartbeat return to its normal rhythm. I didn't cry, but I didn't smile either. I just accepted that that moment was a strange gift from fate, an unscripted reunion, no happy ending, no promises, but with everything I needed. Maybe, in some inexplicable way, the universe knew what it was doing. And now, I can keep going, with a new tire, with an old heart, and with one more memory I'll carry not as hope, but as the certainty that, for a few minutes, everything made sense. After that roadside encounter, everything went back to normal, or at least what they called normal. I got back home, made dinner, chatted with the kids through short messages, lay down in bed next to a man who, for a long time, hadn't shared the same world as me. But inside, something had changed. Marcus had looked at me, touched my car, smiled with his eyes, and walked away. As if that was everything, as if that moment was enough. But he didn't know what he'd planted. In the days that followed, he lived inside me again, not as a nostalgic memory, but as a living hypothesis, as a possibility. I closed my eyes many times and imagined, what if I had chosen differently? If, on that day in the past, instead of choosing the more stable, more secure path, I had run after him. If I had said, stay. If I had chosen love even with the risk, even without a map, would it have been different? Would it have been better? Or would it just have hurt in a different way? I pictured our hands growing old together, imagined our lazy Sundays, the smell of coffee in a small apartment, the way he would smile at my messy hair, the kids that maybe wouldn't exist, or would be different, the life that would be different, not lighter, not easier, but more ours, more real. And I thought about all the time lost, The birthdays he spent without me, the winters when he felt cold, the flowers he may have left at other windows, or not. Maybe he froze part of himself too, like I did. Maybe we lived parallel lives, always with that lingering what if between us. And that's how the week passed, in that rhythm between a recreated past and an endured present. Until one afternoon, while cleaning the car, I found the paper. It was crumpled, forgotten in the corner of the passenger seat, almost invisible. But I knew before I even opened it. I unfolded it carefully, as if touching something sacred. There it was, the number, no name, no note, no promises, but somehow more honest than all the vows I'd ever heard in my life. I kept the paper for 2 more days, left it in my purse, then in a drawer, then under my pillow, until one quiet night, with the house asleep and my chest wide awake, I picked up the phone. My fingers trembled, my heart beat to a new rhythm. Not anxiety, but possibility. I dialed. 1 ring, 2, 3. Hello? His voice. So familiar my entire body went still inside. Marcus? Olivia? Hey, I thought you wouldn't call back. I thought you didn't want me to. Breathing. And then, with the calm of someone who always knew, I never even wanted you to leave.